pressure. And like most things in life, we create in adversity. And my career started as a school psychologist in, what year was that? Like 1998. And I always wanted to work with students. I had a real passion for working with students. And I didn't realize how much that the actual front, like in front of the classroom, was something that I would end up doing. And I came to Windsor to work at the Catholic Board on an ISA grant, if any of you can remember that. And it was a one-year contract. I'd already been working for 5 years before that at different school boards, and it ended, and an opportunity came up at St. Clair College. And I had an opportunity to teach into a wide variety of programs, and also I was mainly hired to work in the cloud nursing program because you needed it's a degree program, so you needed somebody with a Ph.D. And in October of that year, that would have been October of 2003, I was called back to the Catholic Board, and I didn't realize it, but at the time, because it was not in my plans like anything, that I found my passion and my purpose. So I continued to practice as a counseling and school psychologist privately until 2016, so for 18 years, and then I retired my practice so I could focus more on professionally speaking, writing, and that's what I do at night and on the weekends, and then obviously my day job. So I'm very happy to be here. The place that Thriving Under Pressure came out of, and also my blog, is in 2016, I really noticed, and you can all relate to this too, that, what was the year that you noticed a shift in your own classrooms, maybe in administration, maybe also as a counselor, just a real heightened talk about stress and anxiety. We went from stress, anxiety, and now everybody's talking about trauma now. So everything kept getting heightened and heightened. And I realized that so many of my students, and depending on the semester, I teach as many as 300 students, they were asking very similar questions. And an outlet for me was to create a blog. And then I had an opportunity to do the TEDx. And so the idea is that there will always be pressure. There will always be pressure. And what we want to be able to do is to know how to take the pressure off, and also, and sometimes increase the pressure to get to where we want to. So that moves into today's first part of the talk, which is on COVID, burnout, risk, and protective factors. So this is where I really want to involve you. And what are some of the signs that have shown up for you, some of the signs that have shown up in terms of feeling burnt out, detached, stress? What are some of the ways that it's showed up for you at work? Yes, disengaged, and part of the disengagement is feeling not in control in any way. And this is difficult because I'm sure, Warren, to begin with, you are someone who has a real passion for your job. So disengagement, what are some other ways that burnout for you has shown up? Yeah, lack of motivation, lack of energy, struggle with supports from home because it's 24/7. You never get a break from it, not sleeping well. We can all relate to, it's not sleeping through the night anymore. Most likely less focus, less energy, every day starts to feel the same, lack of structure, feeling boxed in, definitely feeling that you don't have the freedom, the unknown, all of those things, feeling overwhelmed. This is real. Lack of balance, all of those things. And you can continue to add to that, because what I want to do is sort of feeling under pressure with no breaks. Absolutely no pressure, so much pressure and no breaks, feeling exhausted, all of these things. And seeing, some of you firsthand have seen what the virus can do to other people. Well, this is why this next point is so important, because today I'm going to continually talk about Nikki, Joe, Lisa, the other Andrea out there, is that we have to really tease apart, because in the past we've had skills. All of us have skills. We've been around for a long time to manage stress, to manage work, all of those things, but we don't have the breaks like we had before. So we need a new framework for understanding what's happening with us and what's happening with our students. Because the way I see it, the benefit, because there's always a silver lining, is that if we can come out of this with some level of skills, the better. So the problem is always very obvious. It's trying to figure out what's happening with you within it. So this slide right here is the idea, let me see, that it's really important to know, really have an understanding about what's you and what's them. So the idea of emotional intelligence when it comes to burnout, because how you go into the classroom every day, how you shed the stress at the end of the day is going to have a significant impact on how you handle students. So the idea being that what is your burnout separate from the burnout of the students, and what kind of framework that we can have around that. So this is why I want to show you this next slide, and the idea that psychology up until 2000 was all about what's wrong with you. So even a lot of that we're talking about right now, and trying to determine what is something that's more permanent versus something that's passing is whether or not some of the things that we'll talk about today will make a difference. And what I want to talk about mostly thriving under pressure is looking at what your strengths are and what are some of the ways that you have handled stress before and how we can ignite them in you again. So the idea that, what is right, what is definitely one of your strengths that have helped you through the pandemic. So let's talk about that right now. In there, what are some of the ways that you have managed to handle everything? Because we're now in our third, I call it the lockdown. For all the things that you've written down there, so Nikki working constantly, Joe actually witnessing what's happening with other people, Lisa, any of those things. What are some of the strengths that have helped you cope with those challenges today? And for me, it's definitely fitness. Yeah, working out, walking outdoors, and this one started that exercise. I love that you guys are just like right in there, laughter, music, biking, being outside, so that humor, hope, faith, spirituality, turning to each other, that realizing that this is temporary, even though it feels permanent. So all of those things. So your spouse, baking, and so I'm sure for a lot of you, you have skills that you've never had before. I mean, just think about what your tech skills. So beer, love it. I teach a lot on stress and all that, and I want all the ways. Beer, then wine, online shopping, co-workers. The thing about the pandemic, so when we talk about focusing on strengths, we've never had something that is so universal. Up until this point in your life, every single one of us, so I love it, redecorating our home, has had a personal pandemic. So put a yes in there if you've had a personal pandemic. Maybe you've had two personal pandemics. Maybe some of you have a personal pandemic, well, the global pandemic. So every single one of has had a personal pandemic. And what happens with stress, and this is where we start to look below the surface, what happens with stress is that we automatically, I'll talk about this a little bit, but we have what I call stress amnesia. So we forget how much we've already overcome to get here. So how quickly, once again, you put in there the ways that you're handling the stress, you're handling the anxiety, you're handling the intensity, you're handling the fact that you feel like you're locked in a coffin with no key, is that these are the skills that you used before to get through your own personal pandemic. And so that's why psychology, and that's why I'm such a proponent for psychology and I have a passion for mental health education, is like never before is it everywhere. So we have to first really get to our own level of peace before we can teach. Our students have to be able to get to their own level of peace before they can learn. So we need to go underneath it as much as possible to try to figure out what is triggering it in that moment. So when I'm going to talk today about COVID fatigue, I'm also going to talk about COVID grief, because a lot of what's worked for you in the past, even 12 months ago, isn't working as effectively. Like maybe the online shoppers, it used to be 50 bucks, now it's 100 bucks. It used to be maybe a 6-pack, now it's 12, whatever it is. It's like we're trying to get more and more and more and more to get rid of the stress, when in fact we have to go deeper underneath of it to try to figure out really what's triggering it, not just for us, but for our students. And so that's why something like today, and I'm really blessed to be here with you, is if we can, I can give you some kind of framework to understand what's happening below the surface, and how, you know, in some ways, like think about 4 weeks ago when it was a lockdown, then it was a lockdown, then it was a lockdown, like you felt like you were on your knees, you're crippled. But in this point in time, what's happening is that we are going into almost like sensory adaptation. So we can't continually be hit over the head and hit over the head and hit over the head. We're adjusting to it right now. And for some of you, you've been, which is helpful. Some of you have already had your inoculation, so that certainly helps too. So what I want to do once again today is just to give you a better framework to understand yourself, because when we talk about stress and anxiety, and when we experience it, anxiety and stress, fatigue and grief and all of those things are the most physical of all the mental health symptoms that we're going to experience. So that's why when I asked you how are you handling the lockdown, just very quickly you had all these techniques, and those techniques will be with you forever. So we're going to put a framework on that too. And so if I'm going to talk about risk factors, you know, I thought about this the other day, and here it's easier. Is that a really important model, and all of you have the color copies of this, to really understand, you know, what's happening with us. What is happening with us internally? When I asked you if you had a personal pandemic, all of you could say, hell yes, fast enough. And what's different with a personal pandemic, so whether it be divorce, whether it be losing a job, whether having money issues, whether it be a death in the family, whether it be mental illness, it can be very isolated. And though we're very physically isolated, we're not emotionally isolated, because we have this one thing in common, and it's universal, and there's no shame. You did absolutely nothing wrong. You did not cause this. But why some of our techniques don't work the same way that they used to is now we're adding grief onto this drastic change that's beyond us, because what we're grieving for is the life we'd imagined, is the life we had. And then every time, because I was thinking about myself personally, when we had that next lockdown and we weren't going to come out on May 20th, and I'm sure a lot of you have this too. Feel free to ask questions in the chat, put anything in there, and there'll be active exercises too, is that I was just holding on. I was just like gritting, holding on until the end of the winter semester. How many of you are feeling that way in that last lockdown? Like, I could just make it to May or March. I could just make it to April. And so that when we look at a model like Kubler Ross here, I don't look at anything in the pandemic as week to week, month to month, year to year. It's almost hour to hour, minute to minute. So that when you're interacting with a student, when you're interacting with a neighbor, a coworker, when you're really going into yourself, imagine where you are in terms of this Kubler-Ross's grief. It's also how we react to change. So for a lot of people, the people that don't wear the mask, okay, and the people that just refuse for it to even imagine, they're in denial, right? But most of the people that we're encountering, especially in our classrooms, I'm seeing this like never before. I've been teaching virtually for 14 months now, is anger. So I'm going to talk about anger when I get to control, because, in the moment, anger gives us a sense of control. I mean, half my hobbies is just reading the comments in the National Post, So we're angry, right? But that doesn't get us anywhere. But even through the course of the day, so when I'm interacting with a student too, And think about the students that you're interacting with, because all of you are all teaching online now too, is that there's anonymity, especially with college and university students, and you're seeing this yourself too. So the anger comes out in ways like, I have to take a step back, and that goes back to a few of the slides earlier, and really check in with that it's not personal to me. So it needs to be a level of detachment like we've never seen before, because most likely the 40 of you that are here with me right now, you're empathic, compassionate, caring people. Research shows the more committed you are to your job, the more at risk you actually are for burnout. So that's why what we did before, we have to be able to take that step back and do some forced breaks. And that'll be part of the toolkit we talk about. So I'm gonna pick 3 of these risk factors for COVID, fatigue, and grief. And I'm gonna match it up with my model for thriving under pressure. Because my hope for you today is for you to leave feeling refreshed, uplifted, to have somebody that really understands and can connect with you on this, and that know that you can, if you have to leave early, you know, if you choose to have the mic on or have your camera or not, today is for you. Today is 100% about you. And my hope is that you'll leave with 3 new techniques for both in your classroom, because what we do for ourselves, we do for our students. And it's really, it's something that we can, that we'll be doing together today. So this is a really interesting graphic that talks about how the communications that were, and once again, this is in the slide deck that I set out, that what the signs of each of these. So what we want to do with our students is sort of have an idea from day to day where they're at in terms of how they're managing change, how they're managing COVID, and how you're managing it. And that will definitely have an impact on your level of burnout, because it really does change day to day. Because often, if you can get through that day, it can definitely make a big difference. Any questions about what I've talked about so far? Any questions? How would you see, let's start with this. How do you see anger showing up with your students? What are some of the, if you want to put that in the chat, what are some of the ways that you see anger showing up with your students? Okay, good. Okay, here we go. Yeah, so so denial is hurting us all. Yes, denial is hurting us all. It's a public health crisis because of this denial. And yeah, a lot more swearing. Yeah, they become easily, because everything that we're experiencing, they're experiencing. Yeah. So we are united. Resentment, a lot of resentment, and they're frustrated, very, 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 very emotional. I am certainly, they want to give up. They disappear very quickly. Yes, they do disappear very quickly. They check out, they ghost. Yes, and this is part of today, understanding the different levels of grief and how your students are, because we have to have a level of disconnect between us and them, so that we don't get burnout. So if we can understand it in terms of a psychological framework, non-compliant, because that gives them a sense of control. Yeah, very impatient, because they are not able to be out with their friends. And they go from virtual learning to their phone too. And we have to also be careful about that. Definitely non-compliant, we're seeing a lot of that. Okay. They shift responsibility. All of the things you have up here, I'm gonna address today. So that's fantastic. That's tough, but it's unifying, because we're definitely all experiencing the same thing. So we've identified what's wrong. It's not hard to identify what's wrong. Basically, it's all wrong. That nobody ever imagined in a million years that we would be living like this. And I did a video last year, because one of the things I do is I create videos. Like I do a 3-hour lecture, then I create a 3-minute video on it, on COVID time management for students. And I said, this will be the lost years. And nobody believed it. How many of you back then thought it would be this long? How many of you thought it would be this long? I actually thought it was going to be 2 years. How many of you thought it was going to be, how long did you think? Nope, there's not which part, but how many of you thought that it would be done by now? Yeah, so Val, I hope 1 year, but my parents said 2, yes. No, not this long. See, as much as I'm an optimist, over 3 to 4 months, Yeah, so there's a wide, so, and as you say that in terms of your time frame, that has a lot to do with the grief too, because we set these expectations in our mind that aren't always realistic. So what do? We're in this unbelievable level of pressure. Our students are in this unbelievable level of pressure. We don't have control. It's beyond us. And I wish it was in 2 weeks. So how do we find, we can't go this way. We can't travel horizontally. I've never rearranged the furniture in my house so much. I have just like a different view, right? But how do we move into, empowerment zone? How do we move into empowerment zone? What are some of the ways that we can do that? One of the most important things that we have to do is we have to change the story. There is nothing wrong with being angry. There's absolutely nothing wrong with thinking what you need to think or any of those things. Even for our students, we want to hold the space for them to experience how they experience it. But at a certain point in time, it's not serving us. It's not serving us in any way. And one of the ways that I change the story, every week when I meet with my students on Blackboard Collaborate at St. Clair, we flip the switch and we talk about at this moment in time, and I'd love you to put it in the chat, what is one skill that you've acquired in COVID that you never would have acquired before? You can have it be a work-related one, you can have it be another related one. What is a skill that you're gonna take with you so that this time does not feel wasted? What is something? Oh, yes. Andrea said to Andrea, giving up perfection. In COVID, I've never in my life been more forgiving of myself. And I just don't have the energy for it. My students meet up with me. I've developed 2 brand new courses in COVID, and I make these mistakes, and we shared the solutions together. So yes, tech skills, running online meetings, forums, technology-based like never before, knowing that there's, one step at a time, let's just hold Nikki there. Being absolutely present together right here on Thursday, May 6th at 1:30, that there's absolutely nowhere to go. So I see COVID as mindfulness on steroids. So there's no room for perfectionism. There's no room for beating yourself up over things that you used to beat yourself up, because we can't. We can't just go shop it away. I'm sorry, but Amazon doesn't count. We can't just go travel it away. We have to deal with it. And we have to change that story. Okay, debating. Yes, so let's hope marriage can go 2 different ways. All of these things as you're in lockdown together. So being present, yes, we've all had to slow down. Our relationship with time is very different. It's very different. I mean, there are 2 trajectories. It's almost like the Twilight Zone. Who would we have been without COVID? And what would the world have been without COVID? And that's part of where we're going to end up. But these are just kind of things to think about. And we cannot debate the fact that we need stress to grow. We need stress to grow. Our students need stress to grow. Resilience, which is really the essence of thriving under pressure, is, as you've already all shared, we've had personal pandemics. And at the end of the day, we're born alone and we die alone. So we have to be able to get ourselves out of those personal pandemics. And one of the things that we want to do is we want to save and rescue our kids. We want to save and rescue our students. And the way I see it is that if I lower the bar for you, that essentially means I don't think a lot of you. What I want to do is help you up and over the bar. So the reason I have a palm tree all the way through is that so many of you said that you'd like to go to someplace warm at the end of the pandemic. Palm trees. But guess what? Palm trees are very different from oak trees. Palm trees need hurricanes to grow, just like us, that it's storms that allow our roots to grow. And that an essence of resilience is how open and flexible you are when things are difficult. So do you flow with it or do you fight it? And most of us fight it until we're absolutely exhausted. The way I see it, I don't have room for it now, so I flow with it like never before. So they bend over and bounce back in hurricanes, whereas oak trees snap in hurricanes. So that's why being one of the big 5 factors of personality is openness. And so the more open we are, so think back on your personal pandemics that you've been through. You got to the certain point that you said, uncle, that you just like, life was taking you wherever it was going to go. And so this is where when I talked about acceptance, which we'll get to at the end, you know, after that last lockdown, anger, depression, bargaining, but at a certain point, and if you all want to put on where you're at right now too, in terms of the grief, that when you get to the level of acceptance, it does not mean that you agree with what's happening. It's a real, almost a deep spiritual letting go, whatever your faith is, and letting God, because it is bigger than you. So our egos have never been more in check. This is bigger than us. So on my blog, I have about 200 posts up there, and about 100 of them are on surrendering. Because at the end of the day, you can only do so much until you get to that point. So the first resilience skill is really more than anything is being open-minded. And this is a gift and that we want to foster in our students. That the younger that you are, you tend to be more open. And any of you who have been through, like you all said, you've been through your own personal pandemic, there's post-traumatic stress. There's also something called post-traumatic growth. And what makes a difference between whether or not you're going to experience PTSD, one of the factors, after something like COVID versus post-traumatic growth is the meaning that you assign to the trauma. So if it was done to you, versus it was done for you. So this is not toxic positivity. This is not saying like whitewashing it, it wasn't bad, it isn't bad, it is, but we don't need to spend all of our time talking about what's wrong because we know what's wrong. That's where we start to look at what's right. And that's where we change the story, for sure. So one of my most, I also wrote 3 psychology textbooks, and one of my favorite chapters was on health psychology, and that you can't dismiss, and you can see in the middle, our students will not be successful without stress. Stress is what gets us to the next level of our life. But in order to get through that stress, COVID, and all the things, what we need is a backpack of all of the things that are on here. So there's never one day where everything's going right. But when I asked you, and if you want to just pop into the comments again, what are some of the ways that some of the things on here, and some of you already said it, that are helping you to bounce back like the palm tree? What are some of these things that are working for you more than anything? Activity, faith, self-care, healthy eating, yes, your kids. Kids are in the moment. Your wife. I mean, we have a job. Our job transitioned. A job is a wonderful place to put our mind. Perspective, yes, Zoom meetings, all of these things. So what I'm going to, optimism, I believe very strongly in optimism. I have a boot camp for that because optimism is a mindset. It's not this magical skill that you're born with. It's something we continue to have to work at. What James put up there, let's see. Perspective. Perspective. And this is where you want to think about all the places you've been before in your life and what got you through to where you are now. So if you look at, layering our challenges, okay, that's James, let's get around, we're not working on perfectionism. So physical cavity, that's okay, activity works. So when we're feeling angry, it's because everything's like, it is so ridiculous, because I saw a lot of you in terms of humor, like it's beyond, like we couldn't even do a sci-fi show. Actually, there's a movie called Contagion, but there, like it's almost like every movie's been written about this, because it is beyond our control, but there's so many things that are within our control. And I can already see it in the chat. The fact that you showed up today, the fact that you woke up today, the fact that you combed your hair, even put it in a ponytail. I mean, like, celebrate all of the things, all of the things. The fact that you have pants on, maybe. And then, and then if we talk about depression, that when we are feeling depressed, it's the opposite of optimism. It's learned helplessness. So we'll talk about going from helpless to hopeful, focusing on the growth mindset. And then, so I've already alluded to a lot of this, but I'm going to continue to give you a framework for this. So this is what's going to help protect us. And all of these things that I'm talking to you about right now, you are doing it. You're skilled. You're working. Most of you have young families at home, and I certainly saw that with Andrea, so there's Zoom, like grade 1 classroom Zooms going on, French classes happening in the background right now. Then you have your marriages, then you have your debt, like there's so much going on right now, but you're doing it because you have roots. And so you're growing more and more and more roots. And this is what we don't really see. But this is part of what this is about today, is to celebrate how far you've come. And when you think that you can't get any farther, you will. But you know what? The light is certainly around the corner. The light is certainly around the corner. So this is the model that I use for thriving under pressure. And what I'm doing, as you can see, is I'm overlaying this. Talk about workouts. This is where I come up with the ideas when I'm working out, is how thriving under pressure, these 3 C's, how they overlay for the parts of our life where we do feel helpless. Has anybody on the other side ever corn-detasseled? Corn-detasselers out there? Yes, I see Kathleen, if you want to put it. One of the reasons I excelled in school is because I started corn-detasseling when I was about 12 years, yes, 12 years old. And I remember I had child labor back then, right? I figured out the value of $1. I'm from Kent County, so I grew up in Blenheim. I used to, set the stage for working hard. And I always worked in the fields. I was always working because essentially my parents would say you can either weed our garden for free or you can corn-detassel. And talk about community, riding that bus to corn-detasseling was a lot of fun. Yes, tobacco is tough, like up there, for sure. There is something called a strain of corn that's hardy corn. And they came up with it so that they could grow this corn anywhere in the world and be able to feed anybody anywhere in the world. But the thing about that was it performed better in bad circumstances. So as much as you believe that you're in a tough spot, most likely, even now, you're still really tough on yourself and you're doing exceptionally well. You're working. You're putting food on the table, like back to the basics. You're doing all the things, you're alive and you're here. And so every day we're being tested. That's where the journey from stress to strength comes up. And the idea that strength is a paradox. We can't have it. I saw some of you put it up in there. We cannot have strength unless we've had the trials and the tribulations. And that resilience is something you've been building since you were 18 months old. And the first time that your that you fell walking and your mom or dad didn't pick you up and let you fall, you were building resilience. I love there's someone in the background there. What's important to understand is that every one of us has a different ruler for resilience. Resilience is the Latin word for leap back. And so for us, and everything's parallels with our students. For some of us, it doesn't take much for it to break. There's not a lot of flexibility in there, but eventually you'll bounce back. Others, they're a lot more flexible and bounce back more quickly. So we're having all of this put on us. So think about balance. If you know, nobody's really all balanced, but the more that every day you have another lockdown, another setback, another pushback, another angry student in the classroom, another disruption, any of those things, you're being pushed and pushed all the way through. But if you have, if you're eating well, if you're sleeping, any of those things, it makes it easier to bounce back. So we all are bouncing back. And once again, we all have different sort of individual differences in terms of how much we can be stretched. I guarantee you that every single one of you, all 42 of you, from 10 different school boards and 3 colleges, have been stretched and pushed in ways that you didn't imagine you could bounce back from what you have. And so the first C of thriving under pressure is control. And the opposite of that, which tends to happen, is that when we don't feel in control, then we have an amygdala hijack. We get angry, all the things. And the thing about control is that this year, last 14 months, what are some of the things that you've had to give up control of? And let's celebrate that too. You know, what have you, things that you used to like hold on to and you wanted to be perfect, it was gonna be excellent. Like, is it the grass? Is it laundry? Is it cooking? Is it working out? Like, what have you said, you know what, hashtag blame COVID? What are some of the things that you've given up control of that you would have tried to do before? Housekeeping, yes, yes, your wedding, time. I love when you shout with each other, the remote control. What else? What have you just said, you know, like, I just can't, like, I have no room for one more thing. What have you just let go and you're okay with it? Like, I actually see this. My husband cuts my hair now. He does a pretty good job. What have you let go? I mean, this is the first time I wore makeup in like a month. Grade 4 math, you can't waste time. What else have you given up? Your golf game, perhaps? Yeah, you've had to give up your golf game because there's no golfing. Like, we're done with that. Birthday parties, like, you know, as much as we want to get together as for family, it was a different kind of Christmas. You know, that you were more relaxed. Social obligations, people that you actually don't want to spend time with. Yeah, three family weddings, you know, holidays, family traditions. And you just can't, like, there's no way you can do it. We've already talked about it too. You can't be perfect. There's no way of being perfect in the classroom in any way. Yeah, graduations. What can determine whether or not somebody is more likely to let go, more likely versus getting angry and upset about something? Or we talked already about blaming and complaining, yeah, with our students, is that when something goes wrong, okay, let's talk about our students for a second. When something goes wrong in the classroom, say they didn't do well on a test, any of those things, do they take personal responsibility for it, or do they blame you? Like, how many times have you been blamed as an educator in the last year more than ever before? You know, how much has that increased versus students that take responsibility for it? Even, yes, so any of those things. So when we talk about control, this is location of control. Where does it lie? So what are some things that we can do ourselves personally to give us a sense of control, to give our students a sense of control when we don't have any? So I'm gonna go right to the activity right now, and then I'll trace it back just to give everybody a break from listening to me. Let's find it here. Okay. And then I'm gonna relate it back to the theoretical part. So hopefully most of you have these slides. So we're going to take probably about, you can pick, you can do all 4, you can do just the first one, but they're pretty straightforward. And then this will really help you have more of a sense of internal locus of control, and not giving you control of the government, not giving you control of the aliens, not giving the control to your husband, not giving the control to your boss, and my boss is here today, not giving the control to your students, because we can feel very helpless, because so often I find myself triggered when there's an emotional response and I have to take care of it right away. I know that's the wrong thing to do. I need to step back. So on your sheet of paper, just up in your own little notes, I'm just going to hold that up for a second, and then I'll come back to this. So the first C in thriving is that when we are feeling out of control, what are some areas that we can look at our lives and bring the control back to us? What are some of the ways that we can bring the control back to our own students? So even in the chat, let's just start with something simple. What percentage of the time do you spend talking about COVID? So out of a 24-hour day, you can put it in the number, what percentage of the time do you spend talking about COVID? 25%? Good. Oh, Warren, you rebel. 20%? Yes, I know, Adriana. That's where you have to be 1%. I'm going to hang out with the 1%. Yeah. And you know what? It's kind of like junk food, because like you can dig into it and talk about it, but then it's kind of like social media too, right? The more time you spend on it, the more exhausting it gets. What are some of the ways that you let go? And you've already put it up there. It could be prayer, it could be walking outside, it could be some of the ways that you just like, I can't control this. I've been smacked down one too many times by the lockdown. I mean, especially, we've been more consistent in college and university. So I definitely feel for elementary and secondary, because you got in and out and in and out, in and out. And when I talk about, you know, how much time do you spend watching or reading the news? And then when was the last time you did a media fast? These are all conscious ways that you can reduce the pressure in your life, because we're talking about the one trigger that we all have in common, and that you can take control of it. So for a period of time, and we used to tape the news. I don't tape the news anymore. That, you know, that you'd have sort of a notification on your phone that even Apple News would come. Nope, none of that. So what are some of the ways that you're doing that, and how can you have a sense of control? And back to this, because for our students, and I've already talked about this, but anger can be very empowering in the moment, but depleting and destructive in the long run. And our students don't necessarily have the skills for mending bridges. Often they'll burn the bridge. And so what I found helpful for me compared to before is I have to take longer breaks than I ever have before. So think about even in your relationships, that you have certain relationships that are depleting versus energizing, and that you have to have harder boundaries in there, because it's too much all the time. When we're faced with any kind of stressor, what happens with our students, and this is why every single one of us have had reactions in the last 14 months, and maybe in the last 14 days. And if you want to put that in the chat, or, you know, it's like students at the classroom, please feel free to put in the chat that in the, you know, just say yes, that you've had an emotional reaction to a situation that you're not proud of in the last 14 months. Guess what? That makes you human. If you're familiar with emotional intelligence, Dr. Daniel Goleman coined the term amygdala hijack. And we have the lower part of our brain and the higher part of our brain. And in my TEDx, I talk about it like the basement of our brain and our penthouse. that when we're in the fight or flight, that we're in that protective mode, it actually shuts down your cerebral cortex, your prefrontal cortex, and you can't think straight. So this is why we have such an emotionally intense response to something, because there are no gradients. It's a tiger or no tiger. And so the only way out of that, and I talked about it a minute ago, is that we have to, and I already hear you guys talking about this, we have to pause. So this is why a pause, and I taught almost 10 years at the Teachers College, and one time I gave some marks back to a group of students, and they were not happy. The entire class was not happy. And I felt it, and some of you may have felt this like this too, and I felt it physically, and I just had to take a break and come back, and by that point they were back in the higher part of their brain. So this is why pause is really important, like never before, because we're back to the flow. We are, most of us, I don't know if you see right here, this is the psychology of flow, and this is how we find our own stress threshold. When we're, I also have it here, I'm getting on the back of it, but when we're in flow, that's really when we're doing sports, when we're reading, when we're teaching, we're not thinking about COVID. We're only in the moment. When we, with ourselves and with our students, when they're at the amygdala hijack part, what's happening is that they're hyper aroused. So that's why constantly throughout the day, in order to get them to more of a place of peace, it's the idea that you lower the information, you lower the stimulation, and or you up the skill level. And so that just like looking at this is just another psychological way of looking at ourselves and our students, so that we can have a sort of a read on where they're at and a read on where we're at, because the goal is not to take what's happening with them, with your neighbors, and dare I say with your own kids and your spouse, personally. It's biology, it's physiology, it's psychology. So what we want to do is be able to give them the skills to assess in a very detached way where they're at. So this morning, for me, it was all about managing my physiological arousal before I came on and gave a live virtual. And same with yourself. If you find yourself heightened, that's why it's important to take more of a break before. Because what happens is that the way that you think in threat is very different than when you think when you're in sort of a challenge, sort of fight or freeze mode. And one of the ways that we all take breathing space like never before, I've never in my life seen so many people outside. And it's an incredible coping mechanism, and it's free, and it's healthy, and it's all the things. And so what happens is that you move out of that threat zone, that anger zone, and you can get to a place of peace, which is so important. The one last activity before we take a break is the idea that it really is our responsibility to manage our energy, and even more so than our time. And one of the ways that we do it in our own household is by complaining less and surrendering more. Because all you need to do is be on social media and anywhere, and there's this real push for sharing, which can be very exhausting to be on the receiving end when you don't see it coming. There's a very big difference between chronic problems and acute problems, between trauma and stress. And one of the ways that you can see whether or not you need to lean into your spouse's story, lean into the story of your students, is that, first of all, we're not their therapists. Let's be clear here. None of us are, including myself with my background. We have Learning Commons, and some of you are there for Learning Commons and happily walk them down there, is that we're crippling our students if we let them go on and complain. We're crippling our spouses if we let them go on and complain. If something's acute, it just happened. But if you're complaining about teaching online, if you're complaining about the fact that there's COVID, if you're complaining about any of those things, and I only have an hour with you, we have not solved anything. We've just wasted that hour together. So that's why I have, this is actually from one of my first Wechsler kits when I did IQ tests. And that for every hour you're with someone, don't allow it to be more than 10 minutes on what's wrong. Because we go to each other to be lifted up, to be strengthened, to be encouraged. So one of the ways that I do that even in the classroom, and we started today's virtual right here, is tell me what's working for you. You know, right now in the chat, tell me what is the best thing that happened to you in the last 7 days? What's the best thing that happened to you in the last 7 days? You say last week, last month, whatever. Some sort. It can be simple, it can be big, it can be small. Yes, the winter term ended the weekend. You got your new fridge. Yes, being outside. COVID vaccine. I get mine on Saturday. Vaccine. Yes. Or you have birds. Man, I've never enjoyed birds more in my life. Squirrels, rabbits, anything. Flowers. Family picnic in your backyard. You went out to a nursery and bought some plants. You know, all the things. These are the things that are working for you. And so, you know, start the conversation, start it in the classroom, like shift it. Give your students and everybody full on presence, but equally celebrate what's right. We can have two emotions at once. Yeah, you rode your motorcycle, you flew your drone, took text with lots of family pictures. That you can be in COVID, you can be in a pandemic, you can be in an inescapable situation, but instead of traveling to other parts of the world, it's almost like we're traveling vertically because we have to find, you know, goodness within it. So you rode your motorcycle, all those things. Yeah, and when we celebrate those, that's when we can get to the next part because, you know, it's obvious what's wrong. Obvious what's wrong. So that if we have to dig deeper into what's right, if we have to, you know, the type A's in the room, we're not in charge. We are not in charge. There's a certain freedom with that. There's a certain relaxation with that. So that said, we're going to take a break till 2:10. I know some of you have to go. You can come and go as you please, but at 2:10, we're going to move into the second C. And this one right here, just whatever I have is yours. Whatever I have is yours. Yes, whatever I have is yours. You know, as I'm pulling out of this, what I found even in my specialty is positive psychology. And positive psychology is new, really relatively new in the field of psychology. And as I practiced as a school psychologist for 5 years, what I didn't expect, how many of your expectations did not match reality? I didn't realize it was going to be more like a firefighter, an ambulance driver, a 911 caller, you know, getting kids in the section classes, all of those. And the only way I could cope and not have my own vicarious trauma, compassion, fatigue, and burnout is to dig into what was right. And which is us here together right now. So 2:10, go relax, go dance to a song, go smell the flowers, and we'll come back here at 2:10, okay?